Imagine this. You wake up, but it feels like nothing woke up with you. Your eyes open, your body moves, you speak the words required to function, but something essential has gone quiet inside. The coffee tastes like nothing. The conversations feel like acting. The mirror is familiar, but empty. You scroll, you check your emails, you answer texts. You go through the motions, hoping one of them will bring you back. But the world feels distant, as if you've become a ghost inside your own life. You tell yourself it's just burnout, or a bad day, or hormones, or weather. But deep down, you know, this isn't fatigue. It's weariness, a kind of soul exhaustion, a quiet disillusionment with a world that no longer makes sense. You've followed the script, you've played your part, you've done the work. And yet, somehow it all feels hollow. Where did the meaning go? When did laughter become performative? When did ambition start to feel like a trick? When did connection become a scrolling simulation of intimacy? There's a question buried beneath your weariness. One you don't speak out loud because you're not sure you're ready for the answer. Is this all there is? Not in a dramatic, rebellious way, in a deeply honest way. A whisper from the part of you that remembers a different rhythm, a different truth. One that cannot be found in metrics, dopamine hits, or carefully curated meaning. This is not depression. It's deeper than that. This is what the mystics called the dark night of the soul, what Jung called individuation through descent, what the Desert Fathers called holy desolation. It's what happens when the soul, tired of performance, begins to withdraw from illusions. Not to punish you, to save you, from the noise, from the masks, from the clever distractions that no longer work. It's not a breakdown, it's a breakthrough waiting to happen. But here's the paradox. When the soul begins to wake up, it first appears to be falling asleep, because all the things that used to stimulate you, the praise, the plans, the possessions, they lose their grip, and it terrifies you. Because if those things don't matter anymore, what does? Philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once said, "We forfeit 3/4 of ourselves in order to be like other people." Perhaps your soul is no longer willing to make that deal. Perhaps it's not just exhaustion. Perhaps it's a refusal, a rebellion against a life that looks right, but feels wrong. A protest against the never-ending demand to be visible, valuable, productive, pleasing. Perhaps your weariness is wisdom, but the world doesn't know what to do with a weary soul. It tells you to get more sun, try breath work, do a dopamine detox, sign up for a retreat. And maybe those things help, for a moment. But what if what you really need isn't relief, but reverence? What if your weariness isn't something to fix, but something to listen to? So here's the great question. What does it mean to be truly alive in a world that numbs you with noise? What does it mean to find meaning, not constructed from ambition or identity, but forged in the still, uncomfortable silence of soul return? Because that's where you are now, not lost, not broken, but standing at the edge of a new self, and the only way forward is down. In the next section, we'll explore why this soul weariness arises, not as a flaw, but as a natural consequence of modern life, psychological fragmentation, and existential abandonment. We'll dig into the roots of meaning itself and why so many people wake up one day feeling like strangers in their own lives. There's a silent epidemic in the modern world. It doesn't scream. It doesn't trend. It doesn't announce itself in headlines. But it's everywhere. In the glazed eyes behind corporate desks, in the strained smiles of parents on the edge, in the late nights scrolling through meaningless feeds, hoping to feel something. It's not depression, it's not anxiety, it's not burnout, it's something more insidious, a loss of meaning. Not the philosophical kind you read about in books, but the kind that once lived in your body. The kind you could feel when you were a child and the world still shimmered with mystery. The kind you haven't felt in years. So what happened? What drained the life from the living? To answer that, We must look at the invisible machine you were born into, the machine that taught you who to be, how to act, what to want, and above all, what to sacrifice. From a young age, you were conditioned to trade essence for approval. You learned to silence wonder in favor of answers, to exchange curiosity for correctness, to tame your wildness for the sake of belonging. And slowly, bit by bit, your soul began to dim, not out of weakness, but out of adaptation. Because the modern world does not reward authenticity, it rewards efficiency, predictability, compliance. To be fully alive, to question, to feel, to pause, became dangerous. So you learned to numb, and the world applauded you for it. Think about it. We've created a culture that values productivity over presence, performance over truth, image over intimacy, and in doing so, we've severed ourselves from the very things that nourish the soul. Nature has become background noise, silence has become threatening, stillness has become synonymous with laziness, and worst of all, we've reduced the sacred to content. Jean-Paul Sartre once wrote, "Man is a useless passion, a bleak sentiment, but one that hides a deeper truth." What he meant wasn't that life is meaningless, but that modern systems flatten meaning. They convert it into roles, jobs, algorithms, bios, metrics. They turn your sacred longing into branding, your pain into a growth opportunity, your rest into a productivity hack. And so the soul, disgusted by the reduction, begins to withdraw. But this isn't new. Even Carl Jung saw it coming. He warned that the modern individual was becoming spiritually starved, trapped in material abundance and psychological poverty. He wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." That's exactly what we see today. An age of spiritual avoidance masquerading as wellness. An era of curated authenticity that never touches anything raw. A culture obsessed with being seen and terrified of being known. And underneath it all, a collective weariness, a grief for what's been lost, though no one dares name it. So what does the soul long for? It's not success, not status, not even certainty. It longs for depth, stillness, wonder. A life infused with the sacred, not just on Sundays, but in ordinary moments. A walk through trees that feels like a return to something ancient. A conversation that touches the core, not the persona. A silence that doesn't scream to be filled. The soul doesn't care about your resume. It wants to feel real, to move in rhythm with something timeless. But this kind of living requires a radical shift. Because meaning cannot be downloaded. It cannot be scheduled or monetized or quantified. It must be remembered. In the body, in the breath, in the broken places you've been taught to hide. This is why the weariness comes. Not to punish you, to wake you, to say, this is not living, this is surviving, and your soul did not come here to survive. Philosopher Viktor Frankl, who survived the horrors of the Holocaust, once said, "When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure." Look around. We are drowning in distractions. Every click, every like, every notification, a substitute for the sacred. And yet, pleasure without meaning becomes hollow. Sooner or later, the thrill fades. And what you're left with is the silence. The same silence your soul has been waiting in. So here you are, tired. Not because you've failed, but because you've succeeded in becoming who the world asked you to be. Now your soul is asking for something different, not another achievement, not another 5-step plan, but something ancient, a return, a remembering, a rebellion. In the next section, we'll examine what happens when you ignore that call. The unseen consequences of soul weariness left unacknowledged. The quiet decay that settles in when you continue living a life disconnected from your inner truth. It doesn't happen all at once. There's no great crash, no dramatic existential scream, just a gradual dimming. You start waking up later. You stop calling people back. You go to the event, but not really. You speak, but the words feel secondhand. You laugh, but something doesn't rise with the sound. And still, you tell yourself, I'm just tired. It'll pass. But what if it's not passing? What if it's accumulating? When the soul grows weary, it doesn't yell. It withdraws. First from joy, then from clarity, then from desire. You no longer want to create, you just want to consume. You no longer want to connect, you just want to escape. Even your memories begin to blur, as if your life is happening behind glass. This is the cost of ignoring the soul's retreat. You lose access to your own aliveness. Psychologists sometimes call it anhedonia, the loss of pleasure or interest in life. But that label doesn't capture the full weight of it. Because this isn't just about joy, it's about meaning. It's about the erosion of why. Why get out of bed? Why write the thing? Why nurture the relationship? Why keep pretending this matters? You're not suicidal. You're not dramatic. You're just tired of the illusion. Tired of dressing up to play a role you never auditioned for. Tired of chasing goals that used to sparkle, but now feel like sand slipping through your fingers. Your relationships begin to feel it. You show up, physically, but emotionally, you're somewhere else. You nod, smile, react.
But you're not with them, because to be with someone, your soul has to be present, and yours has quietly left the room. You start to resent people without knowing why. You start to feel lonely even when surrounded. Not because no one loves you, but because no one sees the real you anymore. How could they? You're not even sure you see you. Your body begins to carry the burden. Fatigue that sleep doesn't fix. Aching in places where emotion lives. Chest, gut, jaw. A fog that wraps around your thoughts, making simple tasks feel monumental. It's easy to misdiagnose this as laziness. But laziness is a lie we tell ourselves when the soul refuses to move. Your soul isn't lazy. It's grieving. Gabor Maté speaks of this kind of weariness as the body's final language, a message that everything else has failed to deliver. Illness, he writes, can be the body's way of saying no when the mind cannot. So what are you still saying yes to? A life that starves you? A version of yourself that exists only to be palatable? A culture that tells you rest is weakness and depth is inconvenient? Your body begins to say no. Your energy disappears. Your nervous system burns out. Not because you're broken, but because you're misaligned. You've been living out of rhythm with your own soul, and the consequences have arrived. Even your dreams begin to shift. They no longer inspire. They burden. What used to be a vision becomes a task list. What used to be possibility becomes pressure. And you wonder, did I ever really want this, or was I just trying to be worthy? This question haunts the soul, because you realize, somewhere along the way, you began building a life based on what looked right, instead of what felt right, and now the weight of that life is crushing you. Eventually, even silence becomes unbearable, not because it's empty, but because it's honest. In silence, the soul starts to speak again, not in words, but in ache, and so you avoid it. You reach for your phone, for noise, for drama, for distraction, anything but the stillness, anything but that voice saying, you don't belong to this version of your life anymore. But here's the most dangerous part. You can adapt to the weariness. You can normalize it. You can build an entire existence on numbness. Wake up, work, perform, consume, sleep, repeat. The machine welcomes this. Because a soul-silenced person is easy to manage, easy to sell to, easy to manipulate, easy to control. And so the system rewards your compliance, while your spirit disintegrates. This is what Viktor Frankl warned us of, that without meaning, people do not flourish. They decay, not just mentally, but existentially. And meaning cannot be downloaded. It cannot be crowdsourced. It must be crafted from the ruins, from the ache, from the unspoken longings you've buried for years. So what happens if you do nothing? Nothing visible at first, but inside, your soul stops knocking, not because it's gone, but because it knows you're not listening. And that is the final tragedy. Not that we are weary, but that we teach ourselves to live with it, that we decorate the prison, call it gratitude, call it adulthood, call it being realistic, when deep down we know we were not born to be this empty, but if you've made it this far, you're still listening. And that means something in you is still alive, still reaching, still remembering, still willing to walk into the fire, not to burn, but to find what you lost. In the next section, we'll begin that fire walk. The rebellion, how to break free, not through fixing, not through optimizing, but through returning. The soul doesn't want to be saved. It wants to be heard. And the rebellion begins the moment you stop running from that voice, the one whispering behind the daily noise. This isn't you. Breaking free doesn't look dramatic at first. It looks like saying no when you always say yes. It looks like deleting the app you check 94 times a day. It looks like not performing small talk when your heart feels like thunder. It looks like sitting in silence, not to be productive, but to listen. These small acts, they are revolutions. Because in a world that thrives on your disconnection, presence is rebellion. There is no one coming to save you. No final guru. No perfectly worded quote. No morning routine that will finally make you feel whole. There is only you in this moment, with the ache, with the truth. And that's enough to begin. You begin by honoring the weariness, not pathologizing it, not trying to override it with more hustle, but seeing it for what it is, a sacred signal. A warning flare from the soul that says, you are too far from yourself. So you stop asking, what do I need to do? And you start asking, what do I need to feel? And when you feel, really feel, grief rises, not just for missed dreams or broken promises, but for the parts of you you had to kill to survive. The playfulness, the wonder, the unfiltered truth. They were sacrificed on the altar of acceptance. And now they return not as enemies, but as orphans asking to be let back in. You don't push them away this time. You say, I see you. You can come home now. This is how you begin to break free, not by becoming better, but by becoming whole. Carl Jung wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. So you don't wait for joy to return. You meet the pain with curiosity. You sit with your restlessness like a teacher. You walk into your longing, not to fix it, but to know it. And slowly, meaning begins to return, not as fireworks, as glimmers. The rebellion continues when you slow down, not out of laziness, out of love. You stop equating movement with meaning. You let stillness become sacred again. You take long walks without headphones. You let the silence stretch. You relearn the language of your own breath. And in that space, something forgotten stirs. The part of you that is not content, not optimized, but deeply alive. You start removing yourself from places where your soul is not welcome, not out of resentment, but out of reverence. You stop explaining yourself to people who only hear what they want. You stop sharing your heart in rooms that mock softness. You stop pretending, because pretending is exhausting, and you are no longer available for performance. Your rebellion becomes contagious. You speak from the body instead of the script. You cry in front of people. You laugh without looking around to see who's watching. And others start to soften around you, not because you fix them, but because you gave them permission to remember themselves. You change how you measure success, not by how full your calendar is, not by how many people applaud you, but by how at peace you feel when you're alone. You don't chase impact. You become integrated. And that is more powerful than any metric. You reconnect with the sacred, not in churches or temples, necessarily, but in small, holy moments. Drinking tea with full presence, watching wind move through leaves, hearing the sound of your own heartbeat and realizing, I am here. I am enough. I am still alive. These moments don't fix everything, but they begin to stitch you back together, not into who you were, but into who you are without distortion. This rebellion is not loud. It is not glamorous, but it is liberation, because the soul does not want a bigger life. It wants a truer one. And the world may not understand this. They may call you selfish, lazy, weird, too much. Let them. You're not here to be understood by systems designed to numb you. You're here to wake up. The moment you choose to live from truth instead of performance, everything changes. You will lose things, but what remains will be real. In the final section, we reach the core, the deepest revelation, not just why your soul grew weary, but what it has been trying to show you all along. You thought weariness meant something was wrong with you, but now you see, it meant something was finally right, because only the soul that has tasted silence can recognize noise. Only the self that has been emptied can be filled with what is real, and the great truth reveals itself not with thunder, but with a quiet knowing. You were never lost. You were only buried. We spend our lives searching for meaning, for connection, for purpose. But what if meaning was never something to find? What if it was something to uncover? Something that was always there, underneath the scripts, the shoulds, the systems? You were told meaning was something to earn, but your soul has always known. Meaning is something you remember, not out there, in here. The soul grows weary not because life is meaningless, but because we fill it with the wrong meanings. We confuse busyness for importance, consumption for joy, approval for love, and eventually the soul says no, not out of despair, out of devotion. Devotion to your original self, the one that existed before you were edited, before you were made digestible, before you were trained to smile through your own disappearance. That self has been waiting patiently beneath the performance, and now you're ready to meet them. This is not the end of your journey. It's the beginning of a new one. The life you build from this place will look different, not always louder or bigger, but truer, because once you stop outsourcing worth, you begin to live from the inside out, no longer chasing, no longer fleeing, just being. And that is power, not dominance, but depth. You'll begin to notice small miracles again, the way the sunlight rests on the wall, the sacred geometry of leaves, the silence between two people who no longer need to fill it with words. You'll start to laugh, not perform, but because your body remembers joy. You'll begin to cry, not from overwhelm, but from return, because this is what the soul was always trying to lead you back to, not some distant paradise, but presence. Fyodor Dostoevsky, after facing his own death and returning to life, wrote, "Man only likes to count his troubles. He doesn't calculate his happiness." But now, you count differently. You measure life in honest moments, in deep breaths, in inner alignment. You stop performing happiness. You begin to live it, not always smiling, not always certain, but always awake. The final, most powerful realization: you are allowed to feel deeply and still be whole. You are allowed to slow down and still matter. You are allowed to not always know where you're going and still trust the path, because the soul does not operate in metrics. It speaks in symbols. It lives in mystery. It doesn't care about what the algorithm rewards. It cares about what sets your bones on fire. So the next time the weariness comes, and it will come again and again as the world tries to seduce you back into sleep, you will recognize it, not as a failure, but as a signal, a reminder that you are still alive, still listening, still in sacred revolt against the smallness the world demands. You'll breathe into it. You'll honor it. And then you'll act from truth, not pressure, from center, not survival, from soul. And here's the beauty. You don't have to abandon the world to come alive. You just have to stop abandoning yourself within it. Let the world be what it is. Let it spin. Let it shout. You will move like the deep ocean beneath the storm, unshaken, unapologetic, home. So now, walk into the world, not as who you were taught to be, but as who you are, not polished, not perfect, but real, rooted, radiant. And when someone asks you, "Why did you change?" you'll smile and say, "Because I finally listened to the part of me that never stopped whispering, even when I had forgotten how to hear. Because my soul was weary, and I chose to come back to life."